It was a warm afternoon when Jordan and his father, Marcus, stepped onto the manicured grounds of Ridgewood Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. The school had a long history of producing leaders, scholars, and innovators. Jordan, a bright 12-year-old with a love for science and an unmatched curiosity, had worked tirelessly for this opportunity. The school tour was the final step in the admissions process, and Marcus had every confidence in his son's abilities. The headmaster, Mr. Caldwell, greeted them at the front entrance, his smile practiced but lacking warmth. Marcus noticed the subtle shift in Caldwell's demeanor as he glanced at them, a fleeting look of doubt and disapproval. It wasn't the first time Marcus had seen that look, and it stung every time. "Welcome, Mr. Hayes, Jordan. Let me show you around," Mr. Caldwell said, leading them through the grand halls filled with portraits of alumni, trophies, and accolades. The campus was as impressive as they had heard, with state-of-the-art classrooms, expansive sports facilities, and a buzzing atmosphere of academic excellence. Jordan's eyes lit up with excitement as they passed a chemistry lab. "This is where some of our top students conduct experiments," Mr. Caldwell said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe Jordan would ever set foot there. When the tour ended, they were escorted to Mr. Caldwell's office for the final discussion. Jordan sat up straight, his eyes shining with hope, while Marcus leaned forward, exuding quiet confidence. "Jordan is a bright young man," Mr. Caldwell began, his tone measured. "His academic record is impressive. However, we strive to maintain a certain culture here at Ridgewood Academy. After careful consideration, we've decided that Jordan may not be the right fit for our institution." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus's jaw tightened as he processed the veiled message. He knew this wasn't about Jordan's abilities. It was about their background, their skin color, and the biases that ran deep in places like this. Jordan, trying to hold back tears, looked at his father. "Did I do something wrong, Dad?" he whispered. Marcus put a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "You've done everything right, Jordan. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Turning to Mr. Caldwell, Marcus's voice was calm but firm. "Your decision says more about this institution than it does about my son. Thank you for your time." As they walked out of the building, Jordan looked up at his father, seeking reassurance. "What do we do now?" Marcus smiled faintly, though a fire burned in his eyes. "We don't accept doors being closed on us, Jordan. We find another way in, or we build our own." That evening, Marcus sat in his study, reflecting on the day. As a successful entrepreneur, he had faced countless obstacles and prejudices in his career. Each time, he had risen above, proving his worth through sheer determination and skill. This time, the slight wasn't just against him. It was against his son. He began making phone calls, gathering information about Ridgewood Academy, its board, and its financial standing. Over the next few days, he learned that despite its prestigious reputation, the school was struggling behind the scenes. Declining enrollment and outdated practices had left it vulnerable. Marcus saw an opportunity, not just to right a personal wrong, but to create lasting change. "Dad, why are you so quiet?" Jordan asked one evening as Marcus pored over documents. "I'm working on something important," Marcus said, ruffling his son's hair. "Remember what I said about finding another way?" Jordan nodded, still unsure of what his father meant. The days turned into weeks as Marcus moved strategically, meeting with influential figures, consulting lawyers, and negotiating deals. Jordan noticed the determination in his father's eyes and began to understand that this was bigger than their rejection. Finally, the day came when Marcus, armed with contracts and a vision, made his move. He scheduled a meeting with Ridgewood Academy's board of directors, who were unaware of his full intentions. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady and commanding, "I'm here to make an offer that will ensure the survival of your institution while aligning it with the values of inclusion and excellence." The board members listened in stunned silence as Marcus laid out his plan. Not just to acquire a controlling interest in Ridgewood Academy, but to transform it into a beacon of opportunity for all deserving students, regardless of their background. When Marcus finally put down his pen, sealing the deal, a sense of triumph filled the room. He thought of Jordan and the countless other children who would now have access to the opportunities they deserved. But his journey wasn't over yet. Marcus had one final stop to make before the change became official. As the ink dried on the agreement, Marcus felt a wave of satisfaction, but it was tempered by the knowledge that change wouldn't come easy. Ridgewood Academy was steeped in traditions that excluded families like his. He had fought for a foothold, but now came the challenge of making the institution a place where every student, regardless of background, could thrive. The next morning, Marcus and Jordon returned to the school, but this time, it wasn't for an admissions meeting. Instead, they were greeted by a mix of curious stares and hushed whispers from staff and parents who had heard rumors of the school's impending changes. Mr. Caldwell, the headmaster, was waiting at the entrance, his usual practiced smile replaced with visible unease. "Mr. Hayes," he greeted stiffly. "I wasn't aware you would be visiting today." Marcus returned a polite but firm nod. "I thought it was important to see how things operate firsthand. After all, my son will be attending this school soon, along with other students who may have been overlooked in the past." The weight of Marcus's words hung in the air. Caldwell's face twitched, but he quickly masked his discomfort. "Of course, we pride ourselves on offering an exceptional education to all our students." "Good," Marcus replied smoothly. "Then let's make sure that pride translates into action." Jordon tugged at his father's sleeve, his eyes filled with both excitement and apprehension. "Dad, are we really changing the school?" Marcus knelt down, meeting his son's gaze. "We're not just changing the school, Jordon. We're building something better, for you and for every kid who deserves a chance." As the weeks unfolded, Marcus became a constant presence at Ridgewood Academy, sitting in on meetings, observing classes, and getting to know the faculty. He realized that while some teachers were passionate and open-minded, others seemed entrenched in the old ways. Subtle but telling comments would slip out in meetings, like references to maintaining the school's culture or protecting its legacy. Marcus didn't confront them outright. Not yet. He knew he needed to pick his battles wisely. Instead, he focused on identifying allies, staff members who believed in the potential for change. One of them was Mrs. Dunbar, a veteran math teacher who had always advocated for diversity but often felt her voice drowned out. "It's about time someone like you stepped in," Mrs. Dunbar told Marcus one afternoon. "This school has so much potential, but it's been held back by outdated thinking." "I appreciate that," Marcus replied, "but I'm going to need your help. Change can't happen without people like you leading the way." Meanwhile, Jordon faced his own challenges. As one of the first new students admitted under Marcus's leadership, he was met with skepticism and resistance from some of his peers. During his first week in class, he overheard another student whisper, "He's only here because his dad bought the school." The words stung, but Jordon tried to focus on his studies. One afternoon, during a science lab, he impressed his classmates by building a complex circuit that worked on the first try. A few students began to warm up to him, but the road to acceptance was far from smooth. Marcus noticed Jordon's struggles and made it a point to support him without interfering. "Remember, Jordon," he said one evening, "people will always have opinions. What matters is how you respond. Show them who you are through your actions." Jordon nodded, his resolve hardening. "I won't let them get to me, Dad." But the resistance wasn't limited to students. Some parents, unhappy with the changes Marcus was implementing, began to voice their concerns at school board meetings. "This isn't the Ridgewood we signed up for," one parent declared during a heated session. "Why should our children have to adjust for the sake of some social experiment?" Marcus remained calm but firm as he addressed their concerns. "This isn't an experiment," he said. "It's a commitment to excellence and opportunity for all. If we want our children to succeed in the real world, they need to learn how to thrive in diverse environments." While some parents grumbled, others began to see the merit in Marcus's vision. Slowly but surely, the tide was beginning to turn. But just as things seemed to be progressing, Marcus received an anonymous letter. It was left on his desk, its message typed in bold letters. "You don't belong here. Stop meddling in things you don't understand." Marcus read the note twice, his jaw tightening. He had expected pushback, but this was something different, personal, targeted, and threatening. He didn't tell Jordon about the letter, not wanting to worry him, but it fueled Marcus's determination. Whoever was behind this didn't scare him. He had faced worse in his life, and he wasn't about to back down now. The letter also served as a reminder that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change was rarely welcomed with open arms, especially in places so resistant to it. But Marcus knew one thing for certain. He was doing this for Jordon, for the students who came after him, and for the future they all deserved. The letter was only the beginning of a series of small but unsettling obstacles. Marcus began noticing subtle signs of resistance. A delay in the implementation of new policies, unexplained cancellations of meetings, and whispers that grew quiet when he entered a room. It was clear that some within the school community were intent on undermining his efforts. One evening, as Marcus was reviewing plans for a new scholarship initiative designed to bring in more underprivileged students, his phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Caldwell, the headmaster, requesting an urgent meeting the next morning. When Marcus arrived at Caldwell's office, he was met with a frosty reception. Caldwell gestured for him to sit down but didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell began, his tone clipped, "there are growing concerns among the staff and parents about the direction you're taking the school. Some feel it's destabilizing." Marcus didn't flinch. Destabilizing? Or challenging the status quo? Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The school has a legacy to uphold. Rapid changes can lead to unrest, and unrest isn't good for anyone, especially the students. Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. Legacy doesn't mean exclusion. If Ridgewood wants to maintain its reputation for excellence, it needs to evolve. Excellence isn't exclusive, it's inclusive. That's what real growth looks like. Caldwell pressed his lips together, clearly unhappy but unable to refute Marcus's logic. "I'm simply suggesting a more measured approach," he said finally. Marcus knew what that meant: delay, water down, and ultimately preserve the old ways. But he wasn't about to let that happen. As Marcus left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that Caldwell was only a figurehead in this resistance. Someone else, or perhaps several people, were working behind the scenes to sabotage his efforts. The anonymous letter, the unexplained delays, Caldwell's sudden change in tone, it all pointed to something bigger. Meanwhile, Jordon was facing his own challenges. A group of older students had begun targeting him with snide remarks and exclusionary tactics. During a group project, one boy, Eric, had outright refused to work with Jordon. "Why don't you just get your dad to do it for you?" Eric sneered, loud enough for the entire class to hear. Jordon felt his face burn, but he refused to give Eric the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he focused on completing the project himself. When he presented it to the class, his teacher praised his work, noting that it was among the most thorough and creative in the group. Jordon caught a flicker of something in Eric's expression, resentment, perhaps even jealousy, but it didn't make the sting of isolation any less painful. That evening, Jordon confided in his father. "Why do they hate me so much?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I didn't do anything to them." Marcus knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, people resist what they don't understand or feel threatened by. But that's not your burden to carry, Jordon. You're here because you deserve to be, just like anyone else. Don't let their ignorance define you." Jordon nodded, though the weight of the situation was clearly taking its toll. Marcus made a mental note to address the issue with the school staff, but he also knew that Jordon needed to find his own way to stand tall in the face of adversity. The next day, during a parent-teacher meeting, Marcus brought up the need for stricter policies against bullying and exclusion. Predictably, some parents pushed back. "Kids will be kids," one parent said dismissively. "You can't control every little thing they say or do." Marcus didn't let the comment slide. "This isn't about controlling kids. It's about creating an environment where every child feels safe and valued. If we don't address these issues now, we're teaching them that it's okay to belittle others, and that's a lesson they'll carry for the rest of their lives." The tension in the room was palpable, but Marcus's words struck a chord with some. A few parents even voiced their support, sharing their own concerns about the school's culture. As the weeks went on, Marcus's resolve only deepened. He began hosting community forums, inviting parents, teachers, and even students to share their thoughts and ideas for improving the school. Slowly but surely, he started to see glimmers of hope. Some parents who had initially been resistant were now engaging in meaningful conversations about diversity and inclusion. Teachers who had been hesitant to embrace change were beginning to see the value in Marcus's vision. But the resistance hadn't disappeared entirely. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from his assistant, informing him that the funding for the scholarship initiative had mysteriously been put on hold. When he investigated further, he discovered that several key donors had withdrawn their support, citing concerns about the school's direction. It was a calculated move, one designed to cripple his efforts. Marcus realized that if he didn't act quickly, the entire initiative could collapse. But who was behind it? And how far were they willing to go to maintain the status quo? Marcus knew he had to act swiftly. The sudden withdrawal of funds wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine him. But who had enough influence to orchestrate such a move? His mind raced through the possibilities, and one name stood out: Gerald Hensley, a prominent alumnus and one of the largest donors to the school. Hensley had made his disapproval of Marcus's policies clear during the first few community meetings, though always with a veneer of politeness that barely masked his disdain. Marcus decided to confront Hensley directly. He arranged a meeting under the guise of discussing future funding opportunities. As they sat across from each other in the conference room, Marcus wasted no time. "I noticed you pulled your contributions from the scholarship fund," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "May I ask why?" Hensley leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I'm simply reallocating my resources to causes that align more closely with my values," he replied smoothly. "Ridgewood's tradition is one of excellence and exclusivity. Bringing in students who don't fit that mold, well, let's just say it's not the direction I envisioned for this institution." Marcus felt a surge of anger, but kept his composure. "Excellence and exclusivity aren't the same thing, Mr. Hensley. Excellence thrives on diversity, of thought, of background, of opportunity. By limiting access, we're not preserving excellence. We're stifling it." Hensley's expression hardened. "You're entitled to your opinion, Mr. Hayes. But as a major stakeholder in this school, I have every right to ensure it stays true to its roots." Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "You have influence, yes? But this school isn't yours to mold into a relic of the past. It belongs to the students who walk its halls, who shape its future. And I won't stand by while you try to take that away from them." Hensley didn't respond immediately, but the tension in the room was electric. It was clear that the battle lines had been drawn. Meanwhile, Jordon was facing his own turning point. A teacher, Mrs. Bennett, who had always seemed supportive, pulled him aside after class one day. "Jordon, I wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've noticed some of the other students have been less than kind. If there's anything I can do, please let me know." Jordon appreciated her concern but couldn't shake the feeling that even she was holding back. "Thank you, Mrs. Bennett," he said. "But honestly, I just want to know why people see me as different. Why is it so hard for them to accept me?" Her eyes softened, but she didn't have an answer. "Change is difficult, Jordon. But people like you and your father are the ones who make it possible." Jordon carried those words with him, but they didn't make the isolation any easier. During a group activity in history class, Eric once again singled him out. "You think you're so special because your dad's rich?" Eric sneered. "Newsflash. Money doesn't buy respect." Jordon finally had enough. "Respect isn't something you give or take. It's earned," he shot back. "And maybe if you spent less time tearing people down and more time bettering yourself, you'd understand that." The room fell silent. For the first time, Eric looked genuinely unsettled, as though Jordon had pierced through the carefully constructed armor of his privilege. But before Jordon could feel any sense of victory, Eric smirked. "Let's see how much respect you've earned when you're gone," Eric muttered under his breath. The cryptic remark left Jordon uneasy. That evening, he told his father about the exchange. Marcus's jaw tightened as he listened. "Stay close to me tomorrow," Marcus said. "And if anything feels off, let me know immediately." The next morning, Marcus arrived at school to find a small group of parents and students gathered outside, holding signs. The protest was quiet but pointed. "Save Ridgewood's legacy, say no to Marcus Hayes." Inside, Marcus discovered an emergency board meeting had been called. Caldwell greeted him at the door with a grim expression. The board is concerned about the growing unrest, Caldwell said. They're considering a vote of no confidence. Marcus felt the weight of the words, but refused to back down. Let them vote, he said. I stand by every decision I've made. As he entered the room, all eyes turned to him. Hensley sat at the head of the table, a smug look on his face. It was clear this was his doing. Marcus braced himself for what was coming, knowing the stakes had never been higher. The boardroom was oppressively silent as Marcus took his seat. Hensley cleared his throat, his voice oozing with calculated authority. Mr. Hayes, he began, it has come to the board's attention that your recent initiatives have caused significant disruption among the Ridgewood community. As such, we've convened to discuss whether your leadership is still in the best interest of this institution. Marcus scanned the room, noting the hesitant glances and nervous shuffling. The weight of the situation pressed on him, but he refused to let it show. With all due respect, Marcus replied, his voice steady, the disruption is not caused by my leadership, but by resistance to much-needed progress. Ridgewood's mission has always been to cultivate excellence, and that begins with inclusivity. If that vision threatens the comfort of tradition, then so be it. A murmur rippled through the room. Hensley leaned forward, his lips curling into a condescending smile. You speak of inclusivity, but at what cost? Enrollment is down, donors are pulling out, and now protests are happening on our very doorstep. Is this the legacy you wish to leave? Marcus locked eyes with him, unflinching. The legacy I wish to leave is one of fairness, opportunity, and true excellence, not a hollow facade built on exclusion and privilege. Yes, change is difficult, but it is also necessary, and I'm prepared to fight for it. Before Hensley could retort, Jordon burst into the room, his face flushed with urgency. He hesitated when he saw the board members, but Marcus motioned for him to speak. What is it, Jordon? Marcus asked, his tone softening slightly. Jordon took a deep breath. There's a group of students outside. They're chanting something about wanting me gone, and some of the parents are with them. It's getting louder. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Hensley seized the moment. You see, he said, gesturing dramatically, your decisions have turned this school into a battleground. It's time to admit that you've lost control. Marcus stood, his towering presence commanding the room. If anyone has lost control, it's those who let fear and ignorance dictate their actions. Excuse me while I handle this. He walked out with Jordon trailing close behind. As they approached the front of the school, the noise grew deafening. A crowd had gathered, holding signs and shouting slogans like, "Keep Ridgewood elite and no handouts here." At the center of it all was Eric, standing smugly with a megaphone in hand. This isn't about education, Eric shouted. It's about protecting our school from people who don't belong. Marcus's blood boiled, but before he could speak, Jordon stepped forward. His voice was clear, cutting through the cacophony. Is that what you think? That I don't belong here because of where I come from or what I look like? The crowd quieted slightly, caught off guard by the boy's boldness. Eric sneered. You think you can buy your way into respect? It doesn't work like that. Jordon's voice rose. Respect isn't bought. It's earned. And I've worked hard to be here. Maybe that's something you wouldn't understand because you've never had to fight for anything. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some of the protesters began to lower their signs, their resolve wavering. But Eric wasn't done. Your dad's just throwing money around, pretending to care about this school, Eric said. But what happens when he gets bored and leaves? Ridgewood isn't a charity. Before Marcus could intervene, Jordon took another step forward. My dad isn't pretending to care. He's fighting for kids like me who deserve a chance but are told no, because we don't fit your idea of who belongs. And if that scares you, maybe it's time you look in the mirror and ask why. The silence that followed was palpable. Eric faltered, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Jordon's words. Suddenly, a voice from the crowd spoke up. He's right. It was one of the parents, lowering her sign. My son would never have been here if someone hadn't given him a chance. Why shouldn't that same opportunity be available to everyone? The crowd began to shift, murmurs of agreement growing louder. Even some of the more vocal protesters looked uncertain. Eric, realizing he was losing his audience, turned to leave, but Marcus stopped him. "You have a choice, Eric," Marcus said firmly. "You can continue tearing others down, or you can use your privilege to lift others up. It's up to you." Eric didn't respond, storming off in silence. Marcus turned to the crowd. "Ridgewood's greatness doesn't come from shutting people out. It comes from the strength we find in our differences. If we stand together, there's no limit to what we can achieve." The crowd erupted into applause, their hostility replaced with hope. Marcus looked down at Jordon, pride shining in his eyes. As the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs replaced by hesitant whispers of unity, Marcus felt the weight of the confrontation settle on his shoulders. The victory was fragile, one skirmish in a battle far from over. He glanced at Jordon, who stood tall despite the tension still crackling in the air. The boy's courage had turned the tide, but Marcus knew the work ahead would require more than words. Inside the school, the board members had been watching the scene unfold through the large bay windows. Hensley looked particularly agitated, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. As Marcus and Jordon re-entered the building, the echoes of their footsteps reverberated through the grand hall, signaling their return like the sounding of a bell before a verdict. "I see you've chosen to stage a spectacle," Hensley sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "But don't think for a second that this resolves anything. This school's reputation is still at risk." Marcus met his gaze head-on. "The only thing at risk is Ridgewood's relevance if it continues to cling to outdated notions of exclusivity. Change isn't just coming, it's here. You can either embrace it or be left behind." Hensley's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Other board members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly shaken by what they had witnessed outside. For the first time, Marcus noticed cracks in the wall of resistance, small but significant. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, the principal, Mrs. Caldwell, entered with a folder in hand. She looked between Marcus and Hensley, her expression serious. "We have another issue," she announced. "The media has gotten wind of what happened today. Reporters are already gathering outside." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. While he had prepared for backlash, he hadn't anticipated it coming so soon. "What's the narrative they're running with?" he asked, his voice measured. Mrs. Caldwell handed him a printed article from a local news website. The headline read, "Wealthy businessman sparks controversy at prestigious school. A fight for equality or a power play?" Hensley smirked. "Exactly what I expected. They see right through you." Ignoring the jab, Marcus scanned the article. The tone was cautious, painting the morning's events as a clash of ideals. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it left room for doubt, a dangerous thing in a world hungry for scandal. "We need to address this immediately," Marcus said, his mind racing. "Transparency is our best weapon. I'll hold a press conference." Hensley raised an eyebrow. "You think grandstanding in front of cameras will solve anything? It'll only make you look desperate." "It's not about me," Marcus shot back. "It's about this school and what it stands for. If we don't define the narrative, someone else will." Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "I agree, but you'll need to be careful. The public will be looking for any sign of insincerity." Jordon tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Dad, are you sure about this? They're going to twist everything you say." Marcus knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "The truth is powerful, Jordon. And the truth is that you, and kids like you, belong here. We can't let fear silence us." With Jordon's hesitant nod, Marcus stood and faced the room. "Prepare a statement," he instructed Mrs. Caldwell. "I'll address the press this afternoon." The hours leading up to the press conference were a blur of preparation. Marcus rehearsed his message, carefully balancing honesty with diplomacy. He knew the stakes were high. This wasn't just about Ridgewood, but about the broader fight for equality in spaces long dominated by privilege. As the appointed time drew near, Marcus stepped out onto the steps of the school. The crowd of reporters was larger than he expected, their cameras flashing as he approached the podium. Behind him stood Jordon, Mrs. Caldwell, and a few faculty members who had privately voiced their support. The murmurs quieted as Marcus began to speak. "Today, Ridgewood Preparatory finds itself at a crossroads. This institution has long prided itself on excellence, but true excellence cannot exist without fairness and inclusivity. My family's presence here is not a disruption. It is a reminder of what this school can and should be. For every child who has ever been told they don't belong, this moment is for you. Change is never easy, but it is always worth fighting for. As he spoke, Marcus scanned the crowd, watching as expressions shifted. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others nodded in quiet agreement. The weight of his words hung in the air, their impact yet to be fully realized. Just as he finished, a voice from the back of the crowd shouted, "What about the protests? How do you respond to claims that your influence is undermining the school's traditions?" Marcus paused, letting the question linger. Then, with unwavering calm, he replied, "Tradition should never be a shield for exclusion. Ridgewood's traditions are not being undermined. They are being elevated to include every child who dreams of excellence, regardless of where they come from." The crowd erupted into a flurry of questions, but Marcus stepped back, signaling that his statement was complete. As he turned to re-enter the building, he noticed Jordon standing taller than he ever had, his eyes shining with newfound pride. But Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. The fallout from the press conference would bring new challenges, and not everyone would be swayed. Yet, for the first time, it felt like the tide was beginning to turn. In the days following the press conference, the media frenzy intensified. The school board held emergency meetings, and letters poured in from parents, some supportive, others outraged. Marcus kept his composure, refusing to be baited into petty arguments. Instead, he focused on his larger mission, ensuring Ridgewood became a place where all children could thrive, regardless of their background. Behind the scenes, the truth about Ridgewood's admissions process began to unravel. Whistleblowers within the administration leaked evidence of discriminatory practices, ranging from unequal assessments to veiled quotas. The revelations shocked the community, forcing the board to take swift action. At a pivotal board meeting, Marcus and Jordon attended alongside Mrs. Caldwell, who had become an unlikely ally. The once intimidating Hensley sat across from Marcus, his confidence visibly shaken. "We've reviewed the evidence," one board member announced solemnly. "It's clear that changes must be made." Hensley attempted to interject, but the chairwoman silenced him with a sharp glance. Effective immediately, Ridgewood Preparatory will implement a transparent admissions policy, undergo diversity training, and establish a scholarship program to ensure access for all qualified students. A ripple of applause filled the room, led by faculty and staff who had long felt powerless to challenge the status quo. Marcus allowed himself a small smile but remained focused. "I'll also be funding an initiative to mentor underprivileged students who aspire to attend Ridgewood," Marcus said, rising to his feet. "This isn't just about my son. It's about creating opportunities for every child who deserves a chance." As the meeting concluded, Marcus turned to Jordon, who had been quietly observing the proceedings. "You see, son," Marcus said, "this isn't just about fighting against what's wrong. It's about building something better." The moral of Marcus's journey was clear. Power and privilege are tools, but their greatest purpose is to uplift others. His actions didn't just change a school. They set a precedent for the community and beyond. Months later, Jordon began his first semester at Ridgewood, walking confidently into a classroom that now reflected the diversity of the real world. As he glanced back at his father waiting outside, Jordon smiled, knowing he was part of something bigger than himself. Moral of the story: when faced with injustice, one must confront it with courage and conviction. True progress is achieved not through dominance, but by creating opportunities and fostering inclusivity.